All right, thank you so much for staying with us. This is All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson. We're joined in this segment of the program by Senator Marlon Morgan of the Jamaica Labour Party. Appreciate you talking to us as always, Senator. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Dion. Good evening to the viewers. My pleasure.
So for the last 6 to 9 months, if not more, I mean, you can't turn on your TV without seeing the Prime Minister cutting a ribbon, opening a this, announcing a this, doing all kinds of things. And yet, the latest poll results, you guys are still neck and neck with the PNP. In fact, 32.6% said they would vote PNP if an election were called today. This was May 2025, and 29.6% said they would vote JLP. That must be concerning for you.
Well, the truth of the matter is that we have an active and strong Prime Minister. And so you're very correct with that observation a while ago, that the Jamaican people, when they turn on the television set, when they look on social media, and of course when they listen to the radio, the Prime Minister is up and about the country, either breaking ground or of course commissioning new projects or opening new projects, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a hotel or otherwise. I'm coming back to the primary question as it relates to the poll itself, but I'm prefacing it to say this. The people elected the Prime Minister to execute and perform a job, and he has been acquitting himself in that regard. We take note of what these Don Anderson polls have said, Dion, in relation to the PNP ostensibly enjoying a 3% lead. But unlike David Campbell, what I will say to you and the viewers this evening is that there are, with the passing of Bill Johnson, of course, some 2 years ago, there are 2 principal polling entities in the landscape at present, that being Don Anderson and, of course, his Don Anderson polls, and Blue Dot, the Blue Dot polls commissioned by a particular media house. That particular poll has us ahead by 4% as at their May polling. And this set of Don Anderson poll has us behind by 3%. We take no issue with pollsters. We're not going to argue with pollsters.
Really? Because I've heard over the past couple of days sounding as if you have been taking issue with Don Anderson.
I was on with JLP on Monday.
Hold on, let me just
and I made that very same point.
Let me just make the point. And I noticed there wasn't any attempt to discredit Don Anderson in 2022 when you all were leading the PNP by a whopping 18%.
Which is why I'm the person.
But when the numbers start to look close now, all of a sudden it's like, well, there are other polls and we must believe this one.
Well, Leon, what I've said on this program just now is that we take note of what Don Anderson's finding is. But what we do as an intelligent political party that is driven by data in terms of our political strategy, and of course we seek to glean perspectives based on the evidence before us. There are at least 2 players from a polling standpoint in the landscape, separate and apart from our own internal polling. And what we do in the JLP, we don't seek to be expedient, opportunistic, or selective. Because 4 Fridays ago, Dayton Campbell did not present at Bradley Avenue to treat with the poll findings.
It's so relevant to what I'm talking.
Well, it is relevant because the truth is that we cross-reference polls. So we know what the Don Anderson poll is saying. We also note what the Blue Dot poll is saying. Plus, we have our own internal polls to reconcile that. So my response is, even in relation to the Don Anderson polls, the PNP is in free fall, and it is evident. You saw in the segment just now, the segment that preceded this one, that Dr. Campbell was waffling. The PNP enjoyed a 9%. The PNP enjoyed a 9% lead. The PNP enjoyed a 9% lead last September. They are now holding an ostensible 3% lead, and that is incontrovertible.
Actual question. You're concerned about how close the poll numbers are? Because even the answer is poll you're referencing.
The answer is an absolute no.
Okay, because even if you take the most optimistic view of it, the point of my question was that the extent to which the PM and the JLP and the government has been out there, and I've been hearing all the government ads referencing government projects, surely you would have expected and hoped to see a much wider margin, a much more space between you and the JLP and the PNP. With you actually being out in front.
Which is why I have conveyed to you just now that for us, the Don Anderson polls are not the be-all and the end-all. Okay. Yes? So we know that there's at least one other pollster out in the field, and to come back to the primary point.
Remember my point, based on the numbers you just quoted, I am saying let's assume for argument's sake that is the situation. I'm saying given the way you guys have been doing what I called in the previous segment a full court press, those numbers are still not impressive.
And I'm saying we have data set from other polls that are the diametric opposite of the observation you're placing on the table now. Okay. And even in these Don Anderson polls, even in these Don Anderson polls, but I'm here to treat with Don Anderson polls, and I'm conveying to you that even in these Don Anderson polls, we're seeing the PNP in free fall. It means that they are going in the wrong direction, and the JLP is essentially holding firm at least based on these Don Anderson polls, and we have data otherwise to suggest that we are actually in the ascendancy in terms of moving in the right direction, Dion. And that is not arbitrary, it is not far-fetched, because when you consider the program of work of the government and on the political side, the program of work of our candidates, when you look across constituencies, Dion, there were some seats where the constituents had issues with persons, and so we had a yes-no vote in some instances, and we had a contest in some instances, and we are confident as a political movement that the persons who have emerged as JLP standard bearers to go into these elections are fit for purpose and will be delivering the goods, whether it is Ian Ives down in southern Manchester, or Garfield James over in Westmoreland Western, or of course Warren Newby in relation to Northwest Clarendon. So we have been doing the political program of work. Our candidates know what their assignment is, and they have been faithfully executing. That's what we do as a political party. We're not here to argue with posters. I am just situating in this discussion, Dion, that there is not only one sheriff in town.
Using your own words, JLP has been holding firm. And again, that's exactly...
I said according to these polls.
That's exactly the point I'm making. If you're doing all this work and you can't show any movement, you must be concerned. That is objectively.
And Dion, I'm saying you can't be concerned across the board because you have other data set coming to your desk that suggests otherwise. That's a simple point I've made for the past 6 minutes.
Let's look at one of the other poll findings, which is that a third of people who were polled couldn't say anything they thought the government had done well.
Good.
The single biggest block.
Yeah, good observation.
The nearest after that was, I think, 18% that said infrastructure, and that was the only other category above 10%. 9% said COVID, and some of the things you've been campaigning on, employment, only 3.3% said employment, 2.1% said housing, 3.6% said crime fighting. So again, it doesn't look like you're having wholly traction.
Yeah, and then you'll appreciate two things here. That in as much as you can glean from that particular finding that a third of the respondents indicated that they couldn't point to anything, it means that there's another group of the respondents that were able to cite, yes, things that they believe the government would have performed well in and acquitted itself well in.
Yes, and most of those categories were tiny.
And just to be clear, Dion,
most of those categories were tiny.
But what it means is that those persons still found something. And the second point I'm making, but Dion, the point I'm making is here. When you have respondents, you know that there are different groupings and breakdown in the respondents. In the respondents, you're going to have hard line PNP supporters, and of course persons who are cynics where the body politic is concerned, or where the politics of the country is concerned. So it is not strange that you may have persons who are very cynical and very indifferent in the body politic, in addition to PNP-based supporters.
These are people who are going to vote.
These persons, the persons who are cynics, Dion, are typically the persons who stay away from the polls, because they have found over the years that they have convinced themselves as such, it is the job of persons like Marilyn Morgan and others in the JLP to impress upon them and convey to them otherwise. And we're not only doing so through lip service, Dion, we're doing so by pointing to them the tangible and demonstrable things that the government has done, including the solidarity program that's launched today. The point I'm making, just to be very clear, is that a third of the respondents to the Don Anderson polls indicated that they couldn't point to anything that the government has done. Yes, and I'm simply pointing out to you that in that 1/3 of the respondents would be people who are card-carrying comrades who, irrespective of whether God came down and did X, Y, Z, yes, insofar as God wears a green shirt, for argument's sake, they would say that they haven't seen anything that has been done.
Well,
but what we're suggesting, Dion, but hold on, just before we follow, just before we do that,
carrying green shirt wearing
Dion,
people,
just before we do that,
thought would have shown up in numbers and saying people are doing wonderful things.
Just before we do that,
don't suggest that.
Just before we do that, though, what I'm placing on the table, as the Prime Minister did at the weekend, is that, listen, in this election going forward, yes, you have some objective reality before us. The Morant Bay Urban Centre, a space face with which you are very familiar, yes, is there for all to see. The government's handling of the COVID pandemic, we have been hailed and acclaimed by many publications all around the world, many of our peers, in as much as the Bermuda police chief as well, Dion, came just this past Thursday, and made the point that Jamaica has been doing well on the crime management front. We have a 44% reduction in murders.
I'm nearly out of time.
What am I ignoring?
The fact that your argument is that you look at the 29% who say, boy, I can't find nothing when I do, and you say, boy, a comrade. And I'm saying, okay.
I didn't say that, you know.
And I'm saying,
I made mention of comrades in addition to cynics, because that's a reasonable takeaway to conclude, isn't it?
That is the argument. Then your card-carrying JLP members should have been showing up somewhere in numbers as well, saying, yeah, man, then do this, yeah, man, then do that.
They show up in some other polls, but we're not here to discuss those blue dot polls. I don't want to offend your station in relation to your Don Anderson polls.
Ignoring the parts of the poll that don't suit your narrative, and then misdirecting us to some other irrelevant poll, which is what we're talking about.
With the greatest of respect, I don't dismiss Blue Dot's poll as an irrelevant poll. You may elect to do so. You may elect to do so.
It's irrelevant for the purpose of this conversation and this particular poll and question that I asked you.
Let me go on to say
referencing something else in relation to the internals of a poll I asked you about here. It's irrelevant, but I'm out of time.
We're continuing to do the work, and when the elections are called, we will see what and how, what we shall see, in the order of 40 upwards. That's my own assessment.
So the PNP win 38 and you win 40.
The PNP makes it up as they go along. The PNP makes it up. They could not show up for a discussion on the Blue Dot polls. Dayton Campbell was a coward. They could not show up for a discussion on the Blue Dot polls at Bradley Avenue 4 Fridays ago. I showed up at Bradley Avenue and I showed up at Lyndhurst Crescent, at Lyndhurst Road here today.
That's a completely irrelevant point that you have.
That's fine. That's your editorializing.
It is.
I showed up at Nationwide and I'm showing up at RJR TVJ.
As is my right. Thanks as always, Senator.
Thanks you. It was my pleasure being here.
All right, we're going to the break. When we come back, we'll get some additional comment on this. We'll soon come.